Emma Martinez had always prided herself on being observant. As a freelance photographer specializing in candid street photography, she'd trained her eye to catch those unguarded moments that revealed people's true nature. So when her boyfriend, Jake, started acting differently after their new neighbor moved in, Emma noticed every subtle shift in his behavior. Their relationship had been solid for 18 months. Jake, a software engineer with an easy smile and terrible dad jokes, had moved into her cozy apartment 6 months ago. They'd fallen into a comfortable routine of morning coffee debates about everything from politics to pizza toppings, and weekend adventures exploring the city with Emma's camera in tow. Then Vivian Chen arrived like a perfectly orchestrated disruption. Emma first spotted her on a Tuesday morning while editing photos at her kitchen table. A sleek white Tesla pulled up to the apartment building across the courtyard, and out stepped someone who looked like she'd walked straight off a wellness magazine cover. Vivian was petite, with glossy black hair that moved like silk, and she wore expensive athleisure that somehow managed to look both effortless and impossibly chic. "New neighbor," Emma mentioned casually when Jake emerged from his shower, toweling his hair. He glanced out the window and froze mid-step. "Oh, wow, that's quite a car." But Emma caught the way his eyes lingered, the slight change in his posture. As a photographer, she was used to people's reactions to beauty, but this felt different. This felt calculating. Over the next few days, Jake's behavior shifted in ways that might have been subtle to someone else, but Emma catalogued each change like evidence. Suddenly, Jake needed to take work calls on their balcony, which happened to overlook the courtyard where Vivian practiced yoga each morning. He started volunteering to walk to the corner store for milk they didn't need, timing these errands suspiciously well with Vivian's schedule. The real red flag came when Jake started the commentary. "The new girl seems really nice," he'd say over dinner, watching Emma's face carefully. "She mentioned she just moved here from Portland. Must be tough starting over in a new city." Emma recognized the pattern because Jake had played this game before. Early in their relationship, he'd mention female co-workers or old friends just frequently enough to gauge her reaction, fishing for jealousy like some twisted form of validation. Back then, inexperienced and insecure, Emma had given him what he wanted. Worried questions, subtle attempts to mark her territory, the whole possessive girlfriend routine that seemed to energize him. But at 24, after months of therapy, and a growing sense of her own worth, Emma was done playing games she'd never agreed to join. "That's nice," she'd respond neutrally, returning to her editing work. "I hope she settles in well." The confusion that flickered across Jake's face was almost comical. This wasn't the script he remembered, and as Emma watched him struggle to understand why his manipulation tactics weren't working, she realized something that changed everything. Jake didn't just want her love. He wanted her fear of losing him. That revelation crystallized into something cold and sharp in Emma's chest. If Jake wanted to play games with their relationship, she'd give him exactly what he was asking for, just not in the way he expected. The manipulation. Over the following 2 weeks, Emma orchestrated her counter-strategy with the precision of a chess grandmaster. Every move was calculated to give Jake and Vivian exactly what they thought they wanted while building toward her ultimate endgame. She started by becoming the most supportive girlfriend imaginable. When Jake mentioned helping Vivian move furniture, Emma enthusiastically encouraged him. When he came home late from fixing her internet, Emma had dinner waiting and asked thoughtful questions about their conversation. Her complete lack of jealousy clearly frustrated Jake, who seemed to be ramping up his efforts to provoke a reaction. "Vivian thinks you're amazing," he told her one evening, his tone probing. "She can't believe how understanding you are about me helping her out." "She's sweet," Emma replied, not looking up from editing a wedding shoot. "I'm glad she has someone reliable to depend on." Jake's jaw tightened at her casual dismissal of what he clearly saw as boundary-pushing behavior. But Emma had learned that the more she appeared to not care, the more desperately he seemed to need her to care. Meanwhile, her friendship with Vivian was deepening in exactly the way Emma had planned. She dropped by with coffee, always timing her visits for when Jake was at work, building trust and gathering intelligence. Vivian was surprisingly open about her philosophy on relationships. "I think most women settle too early," Vivian said during one of their morning talks. "They get comfortable and stop appreciating what they have. Men need to feel desired, you know. They need to know they're still attractive and wanted." Emma nodded thoughtfully, playing the role of the girlfriend having an awakening. "You're probably right. I've gotten so caught up in my career that I haven't been paying attention to Jake's needs. He's such a good man," Vivian said, her voice taking on that breathy quality Emma was learning to recognize. "So helpful and funny. You're lucky to have someone who cares so much about making people happy." The irony wasn't lost on Emma that both Jake and Vivian were using nearly identical manipulation tactics, making her feel grateful for a man who was actively betraying her trust, while positioning themselves as the wise observers who could see what she was too blind to appreciate. But Emma had a secret weapon: her camera. Years of street photography had taught her to be invisible while documenting human behavior, and she'd been systematically capturing Jake and Vivian's interactions. Long conversations on the building's roof deck, lingering touches when he helped her with groceries, the way they'd both glance toward Emma's window before moving closer together. She also started leaving small traces of her investigation. Visible printouts of apartment listings for bigger places where Jake could have his own office, job applications for positions in other cities, casual mentions of friends who'd found happiness after leaving stagnant relationships. The psychological pressure was clearly working. Jake became increasingly agitated by her lack of possessiveness, while Vivian grew bolder in her pursuit, perhaps thinking Emma was too distracted to notice. Emma would watch from her window as they had increasingly intimate conversations in the courtyard, Jake's body language screaming guilty attraction, while Vivian played the role of the supportive friend who understood him better than his own girlfriend. The breaking point came when Emma accidentally discovered they'd been texting. She found Jake's phone open on the counter, messages clearly visible, and instead of confronting him, she simply took photos of the conversation. Jake: "Emma's been so distant lately. I feel like we're just roommates." Vivian: "She seems sweet, but maybe just not right for where you are in life. You deserve someone who sees how special you are." Jake: "I keep thinking about what you said about not settling." Vivian: "Life's too short to stay in relationships that don't fulfill you. You only get one chance at happiness." Emma stared at the evidence of her boyfriend's emotional affair and felt relief. Not heartbreak, not rage, but the satisfaction of a photographer who'd finally captured the perfect shot. Jake and Vivian had given her everything she needed to end this charade on her terms. Now it was time for the final act. Part 4. The Revelation. Emma chose a Saturday evening for her grand finale, timing it perfectly with the building's monthly rooftop barbecue that Jake had enthusiastically volunteered to help organize. As residents gathered with their contributions to the potluck, Emma arrived fashionably late, carrying a tablet and wearing the kind of confident smile that made several neighbors do double takes. Jake was at the grill with Vivian beside him, playing the role of his helpful assistant, while Emma's actual girlfriend was supposedly too busy with work to attend. They looked comfortable together, domestic even, and Emma could see other residents beginning to whisper about the obvious chemistry between them. "Sorry I'm late, everyone," Emma announced, her voice carrying across the rooftop. "I was putting together a little presentation I thought you'd all enjoy." She connected her tablet to the building's projector system, ostensibly set up for outdoor movie nights. Jake's face went pale as he realized what was happening, but before he could stop her, Emma had begun her slideshow. "I've been working on a photography project about human behavior and social dynamics," she said conversationally as the first image appeared on the makeshift screen. It was a beautifully composed shot of Jake and Vivian on this very rooftop, their body language unmistakably intimate despite the careful distance they maintained. "Street photography teaches you to see the stories people don't realize they're telling," Emma continued, advancing to the next slide. This one showed Jake checking his phone while Emma was presumably at work, his expression eager and secretive. The gathered neighbors were riveted, sensing drama, but not yet understanding the scope of what they were witnessing. Jake started moving toward her, but Emma had positioned herself strategically near the building manager, who was watching with obvious fascination. "But the really interesting part came when I started researching social patterns," Emma said, pulling up screenshots from the Portland forum. "Turns out some people have a very specific method for inserting themselves into established relationships." Vivian's face had gone white, then red, then white again. She started to speak, but Emma held up a hand. "Oh, we're not done yet. See? What I discovered is that this isn't really about attraction at all. It's about power. Some people get their validation from proving they can disrupt other people's happiness." The next slides were devastating. The text messages between Jake and Vivian, carefully time-stamped to show the escalation of their emotional affair. Screenshots of Vivian's social media posts from Portland, with Emma's research revealing the pattern of broken relationships left in her wake. "The fascinating thing," Emma continued, her voice steady, despite the chaos erupting around her, "is how predictable it all becomes once you understand the game. The helpful neighbor, the understanding friend, the girlfriend who's supposedly not appreciating her man properly." Jake finally found his voice. "Emma, stop! This is insane. You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" Emma turned to face him directly, and for the first time that evening, her composure cracked slightly. "Because from where I'm standing, I'm the only one who's been honest about what's happening here." The rooftop had gone completely silent, except for the distant sound of traffic below. Emma looked around at her neighbors, people she'd lived among for 3 years, who'd watched Jake help Vivian with her groceries and seen them having long conversations by the mailboxes. "Here's the thing about games," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "They only work when the other players don't realize they're playing. But once you understand the rules, once you see the patterns, the game becomes pretty easy to win." She disconnected her tablet and tucked it under her arm. "Jake, I've packed your things. They're by the door downstairs. Vivian, I've forwarded all my research to the building manager and the neighborhood association. I'm sure they'll be very interested in discussing lease terms with someone who has such an impressive track record." As Emma walked toward the rooftop exit, she paused and turned back one final time. "Oh, and for anyone wondering, this is what it looks like when someone refuses to play the victim in their own story." The silence that followed her departure was deafening. The resolution. 3 months later, Emma sat in her favorite coffee shop editing photos from her latest project, a series on urban renewal that had already garnered interest from 2 galleries. Her apartment, once shared with Jake, had been transformed into a proper studio space, and for the first time in years, she felt completely at home in her own life. The aftermath of her rooftop revelation had been swift and decisive. Jake had initially tried to gaslight her, claiming she'd misunderstood everything and that his friendship with Vivian was completely innocent. But the evidence had been too overwhelming, and the damage to his reputation in their building was irreversible. He'd moved out within a week, attempting one last manipulation by suggesting they could work things out if Emma was willing to trust him again. Emma's response had been to change the locks. Vivian had disappeared even faster. The building manager, armed with Emma's research, had discovered that Vivian's lease application contained falsified references from her Portland apartment. Faced with eviction, she'd vanished in the middle of the night, leaving behind only a note claiming Emma was psychotic and obsessive. The neighborhood's reaction had been mixed but largely supportive. Some residents thought Emma's methods had been extreme, but others admitted they'd sensed something off about the dynamic between Jake and Vivian. Mrs. Patterson from 4B had even confessed that her own husband had mentioned how understanding Vivian was compared to nagging wives. "You did us all a favor," she'd told Emma. "That girl was trouble looking for a place to happen." More importantly, Emma had learned something crucial about herself. She'd discovered that she was capable of strategic thinking and decisive action when her well-being was at stake. The passive, accommodating girlfriend who'd worried about being too independent had been replaced by someone who understood her own worth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, the documentary filmmaker she'd met at a gallery opening the previous month. They'd been taking things slowly. Emma had been upfront about her recent breakup and her need to focus on rebuilding her sense of self, but Marcus had been refreshingly direct about his interest and respectfully patient with her boundaries. "Still, on for dinner tonight? I found a place with the best natural lighting for your photography talk afterward." Emma smiled as she typed back her confirmation. Dating Marcus felt different. There were no games, no tests, no manipulation disguised as affection. He seemed genuinely interested in her work, her thoughts, her goals. It was remarkable how peaceful a relationship could be when both people were emotionally mature enough to communicate honestly. As she packed up her laptop, Emma caught her reflection in the coffee shop window. The woman looking back at her appeared confident, focused, and genuinely content. She'd weathered her first real test of setting boundaries and protecting her own interests, and she'd emerged stronger for it. Her phone rang, her mother calling for their weekly check-in. "You sound different," her mom said after Emma updated her on the gallery interest in her work. "Happier, more settled." "I feel settled," Emma admitted. "I think I finally figured out that I don't need someone else's validation to know who I am." "About time," her mother laughed. "Your father and I were wondering how long it would take you to realize you were dating a child." Emma laughed, gathering her things and stepping out into the afternoon sunshine. The city stretched out before her, full of stories waiting to be captured, relationships waiting to be built on foundations of honesty rather than manipulation. For the first time in months, Emma felt excited about what came next. She'd learned to trust her instincts, value her independence, and refuse to accept less than she deserved from the people in her life. The game was finally over, and Emma had won by refusing to play.